Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am really appreciative that we have such a wonderful audience in numbers and in intellectual quality here with us today. The museum has just an hour and a half ago issued a circular that we will not be having any more lectures, seminars, programs that we had arranged. So in case you don't hear from us for some time, please bear with us. We had a lecture on jewelry planned in another fortnight by Usha Balakrishnan, coinciding with the jewelry gallery that has opened, but that too we've asked to wait for it, and then there are lectures in May, and we hope that all this will come under control. But this is a safety precaution. All institutions have been asked to take it, but I didn't let my arm get twisted last night when this was being discussed. I said, we will go ahead with this lecture. And we worked very hard. Kamalika Bose has worked very hard. And she was also, as she said earlier this evening, I was dreading the phone call from you. So I said, no. So thank you very, very much. We're looking forward to your presentation. And we're very appreciative that you've got this book on sale written by a dear friend of ours, Mr. George Michell. So many of us, I think, and she mentioned many people have been to this part of India and are very knowledgeable or have some knowledge about this period and of the Hoysala Legacy and Belur, Halebidu, and Somanathapura. And recently, our Museum Society took a trip in November to Hampi. So there is a great interest in this period, 18th century, and we're very, very happy to have Kamalika with us. I don't wish to stand between you and the speaker, but these lectures, ladies and gentlemen, cannot be held without your support. Your support, I mean, you come to the lectures, you attend them, you are interactive with the speaker, and you take home something from the event that we organize it, and this is our greatest reward. But without the support of our sponsors, and today I would like to thank Natesan Antiqarts, a well-wisher of the Museum Society. His entire family has been supported, and I'm so happy young Mr. Natesan is here with us, and he was standing outside having a cup of tea with me about 3 months ago and was wondering, how am I going to manage this one? And he said, why are you worried? I'm there. So thank you very, very much for being so spontaneous in your support. Thank you. I would now request Dr. Saryu Doshi to hand over a small memento of appreciation to Dr. Kamalika Bose on behalf of all of us. I think I will say something about our speaker for this evening. She is Mumbai-based, an urban conservationist, curator, and educator with 12 years of experience in heritage-oriented planning, advocacy, and research. She is the founder of Heritage Synergies India, a dynamic practice deeply committed towards the stewardship, preservation, and management of built and cultural heritage. She obtained a master's in historic preservation planning from Cornell University as a Fulbright Scholar. She has authored Seeking the Lost Layers, published by CEPT in 2008, and A History of Interior Design in India, also published by CEPT in 2007, and recently edited People Called Kolkata, a Penguin Random House publication just last year in 2019. So we have amidst us a passionate, young, youthful, attractive scholar. So may I please welcome you, Kamalika, and may the audience joins me once again to wish her a very warm welcome to us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Godrej. It's indeed a huge pleasure and honor for me to be able to come and share this research and this book, that guidebook that we've done a few months back, and be able to share it amongst a very, very knowledgeable and erudite audience at a place like this museum here. So. And of course in the presence of people like Sharyuben and other distinguished guests. So I'm looking forward to sharing the work that we have done. This guidebook, to just give a little bit of a background before I get into the main talk. So this is a series of guidebooks by Deccan Heritage Foundation, which is a non-profit organization that is looking to preserve and create advocacy and heritage activism for heritage and historical sites in the Deccan. And as part of that, they come up with different guidebooks. The books are available outside, and you can kind of look at that. And focusing on the Hoysala legacy was also kind of important, because in the kind of in the body of work that came out in the roughly 150 years that the Hoysalas were active and ruling in the Deccan area, we kind of focused on these three sites, largely Belur, Halebidu, and Somanathapura, because and not on the entire over of the dynasty, because we wanted to kind of understand and trace, like the bookend the two timelines, and when the dynasty kind of started, and the temples at Belur and Halebidu, and how they were kind of really almost kind of experimentally and yet mastering the architectural style and the sculptural style that these temples are kind of world renowned for today. And by the time we come to Somanathapura, which is really towards the end of the 13th century and the end of the tail end of the dynasty, we see how the style has kind of matured. Certain things they've let go of, certain things they've retained, and they've kind of perfected the architectural and the aesthetic qualities of the Hoysala style. So we wanted to focus on these two sort of beginning and end era temples, and see how architecturally, how we can kind of build awareness about them, and to even like the lay visitor, because these are active temples, at least the Belur is, and the rest are kind of tourist sites with significant footfall. So there are a lot of people, they're going there, but there's also a lot of sort of, fables and myth and things like that, which informed guidebooks like this allow us to make accessible to a sort of lay audience, not always necessarily a scholar or an art historian, informative and informed sort of discourse on these temples. So with that sort of a background, I'll dive into today's talk. This is, of course, all the photographs that you're going to see in this presentation have been commissioned for this guidebook by Surendra Kumar, and they're often extremely high quality visual character. And before we get into that, it would be good to first understand a little bit of the context where the Hoysalas kind of emerged and built their kingdom. So really the history of the Hoysalas span from their rise in the 11th century until their demise in the mid sort of 14th century, originating in the forested hills of the Western Ghats. So this kind of landscape, they kind of began their careers in Angadi in southwest Karnataka. From here, they shifted to the trade route city of Belur, and then founded Halebidu to govern much of the southern Deccan for about 200 years. Theirs was a fertile domain through which flowed the three rivers, Yagachi, Hemavati, and Kaveri. With dependable monsoons, these rivers made cattle grazing and cultivation, so essentially agriculture, possible, on which the local economy relied. Supplementing this were the taxes that the rulers had on spinning, weaving, oil extraction, jaggery, and sugar, etc. So this kind of gives you the geographical and the sort of terrain and the context in which the kingdom came up. And then if we kind of situate that in a territorial map, we begin to see that it's kind of strategic in the way, oops. They were kind of located some around here because the commerce with the Arabian Sea ports beyond the Western Ghat led to imports of horses, pearls, and other luxury goods, as well as the profitable trade routes that wended their way through to the Tungabhadra Valley to the north, into the Yadav territories, into Maharashtra, and other trade routes following the Kaveri River into the Chola sort of bastions in the south and along with the Pandya territories. So it was along these that the Hoysalas extended their sway, stretching their kingdom for almost 500 kilometers, encompassing most of Karnataka. These three maps are kind of interesting to understand how in the early 11th century it was all predominantly Chalukya and Chola territory, and then we kind of begin to see the emergence of the Hoysalas and the Kakatiyas who were initially under the Chalukyas. They were endorsing Chalukya suzerainty. So before emerging as an independent lineage, the Hoysalas were subordinates to the Chalukya rulers in northern Karnataka, and they were also often heading expeditions on their behalf. But as Chalukya power weakened in the second half of the 11th century, we see Vinayaditya and Ereanga kind of asserting their influence and renouncing that suzerainty. By the time we move into this period, we see that Dwarasamudra has already been established as the headquarters of, which is present-day Halebidu, and Vishnuvardhan was the first Hoysala to kind of assert his autonomy by ceasing to send tributes to the Chalukya overlords. And then in 1117, when he captured Talakkad in extreme Karnataka, that's when he established the two main temples that I'll be coming to. And then when we come to kind of the late 14th century, we see that Ballal III has kind of ascended to the throne here. But we also see that this is the time when the southern India, the peninsular India, has been invaded by Malik Kafur, who was the commander of the Khalji Sultans in Delhi. So Kafur arrived in Halebidu in 1311. He seized a large quantity of treasure and also royal elephants and continued kind of marauding deeper into the south. So it was a fairly turbulent phase due to these sort of invasions, and that's when Hoysala power began to kind of diminish, and we see a new ruler emerging who was Harihara I, who eventually established the Vijayanagar kingdom, which kind of then took over. He expelled the Delhi invaders, and he kind of took over a lot of the Hoysala territories, merged them into the Vijayanagar kingdom, and also a lot of the commanders and the ministers kind of switched their allegiance, as it happens in politics, and we kind of see the demise of the Hoysalas as we know it. So this is a very critical, important royal motif, which is the Sala story. So it is said that Vishnuvardhan is credited with inventing the fable of the Sala, the mythical founder of the Hoysala lineage. This hero, as you can see, is shielding a meditating Jain sage called Sudatta from a yali, a savage sort of a leonine beast. And the sage is crying in order to kind of protect himself. Hoy Sala means strike Sala. So this sort of a legendary act of rescue was kind of related and passed down as story and folklore and legend into poems, inscriptions, engraved records, and they finally became depicted into architecture as a royal motif seen at the entrance of temples or at the rooftops around the Shikhara. So we then look at the role of these rulers, because what they began to do is we see almost in 150 years a sort of prolific temple building activity, and almost 300 temples were built across the kingdom in just about 150 years. So what was the strategy and what was the nature of patronage that these temples received? It's kind of critical to understand that by looking at who were these patrons and how the rulers facilitated temple building building as an important activity. So Vishnuvardhan consolidated his power by distributing coveted positions to his ministers, generals, and governors, as well as to Ganga Chola and Pandya families who accepted his leadership. He also proceeded into Chalukya domains from where he recruited skilled labor and artisans who had a long tradition of patronage already. And he was trying to kind of build on their skills and build a definitive Hoysala style of architecture and sculpture. So it was a very, very planned strategy in developing this style. So from there, we see Ballala and Narasimha become the next sort of two rulers between whom, who kind of governed 80 years. And between them, we see a profusion of new towns and settlements, as well as things like irrigation tanks, canals, and wells, which resulted in an unprecedented period of prosperity and territorial expansion for the Hoysala kingdom. And finally, by the time we come to Someshwara in 1235, we see that he's inherited an affluent and prestigious realm and resisted several incursions by the Yadavs and the Pandyas. And he continues to not build new temples, but bequests funds and grants to kind of repair, restore, and maintain temples which have already kind of been built across the kingdom. Now, when we kind of now look at this genealogy and link it to some of the critical monuments and some of the important monuments that were patronized, we see that Vishnuvardhan, of course, as the first independent Hoysala, was responsible for the great religious monuments at Belur and Halebidu. As acts of commemoration, he first created temples of Kirtinarayan, which is the Vishnu of glory at Talakad, and the Vijayanarayan, which is the Vishnu of victory at Belur. When he then, within 5 to 10 years, when he relocated to Halebidu, and there are lots of sort of, hypotheses on why within a decade he had to shift his capital and, build a new temple, etc. We see that he relocates to Halebidu and commissions a grand, not a Vaishnav temple, but a Shaiva temple with twin lingas, which is the Hoysaleshwar, which he dedicates to himself, and the Shantaleshwar, which is dedicated to his principal queen, who was also Jain. So so it is believed that they were Jains, and then he converted to Vaishnavism, but his queen did not. So and it's another important thing here is to then understand that along with these kings, their queens were also commissioning primary important monuments. So it's not like the women or the queens were relegated to smaller monuments like stepwells or tanks, but we see that she has commissioned the Kappe Chennegaraya temple right beside, and I'll come to that in detail. But we see queens also as important patrons building side by side their husbands. So in honor of Shantala Devi, the Jain queen, Vishnuvardhan also commissioned the Shantinath Basadi at Shravana Belagula. Another royal female involved in temple construction was Abhinava Ketala Devi, the junior queen of Ballala II, and she commissioned the Kedareshwar Shiva temple also at Halebidu. And finally, we see the Narasimha III, who commissioned the temple at Somnathapura, but he did not commission himself. He made bequests to his commander, Somnath Dandanayaka, from the royal treasury to kind of commission the temple on the banks of the Kaveri. So we kind of see two forms of simultaneous patronage emerging, one which is through royal bequests to commanders themselves, but there is a sort of doubt on whether the Hoysala kings actually built temples themselves, or they always kind of rooted it through ministers, commanders, etc., even to create their dynastic monuments. So finally, now when we come to Dora Samudra, which is Halebidu, we see that today, if we kind of look at this site map, very little remains, and you can almost not, other than fragments, get a sense of this capital. But if you kind of look at this, you see this is the Dora Samudra tank, which of course doesn't really have water anymore, but there are other sort of hydraulic issues as to why the water is not there anymore. But this is the main temple, which is the Hoysaleshwar, and around it you find other important temples, again all Shaiva temples like the Nagareshwar, the Brahmeshwar, and the Jain Basadis over here, which also says that there was kind of simultaneous patronage to different faiths as well. And this is where one conjectures that the palace grounds really were on the foothills of the Benigudda hill. So you can see that the royal center was kind of away from the main Halebidu town, which had the smaller temples such as the Veerabhadra and the Ranganath temple that you find as you move into the town. There are fragments of this fort wall which are only visible in very small parts. So kind of Halebidu today is pretty much only the Hoysaleshwar temple. But when you kind of look at the sort of larger archaeological construct of the place, you're able to kind of understand the relationship to the tank, how the capital city developed. So apart from direct benefactions, of course, they provided funds, and therefore this, though the Hoysaleshwar is considered the dynastic monument of Halebidu, it is believed that it was financed in honor of the king by Ketamalla, an influential merchant officer, and not directly built by Vishnuvardhan himself. These are, I'll take you through some of the other sites, and you can see this is the Parshvanath Basadi in Halebidu, also sponsored by a minister's son, Bopanna, who was the son of Gangaraj, one of Vishnuvardhan's ministers and commanders. And there are 3 such basadis within here, and you can see that they are stylistically much more austere. Their facades are a lot more simpler than the sort of ornate Shaiva monuments. This is the Kedareshwar temple, commissioned by Queen Abhinava Ketala Devi, and though this has got significant damage due to an earthquake, the ASI is trying to reconstruct this in several ways, and these are all within a sort of walkable precinct. So Halebidu, kind of within that period, was not only the Hoysaleshwar, but there were monuments of sort of equal stature and grandeur. And this one I find really interesting, which is, we have not been able to identify, and maybe someone in the audience can help us later, how this is the entire Nagareshwar temple, and you can see there are 3 temples here, and you can see how large the precinct is compared to the Hoysaleshwar, pretty much on the opposite side of the road, which are 2 temples, and you can see that this is much larger. This would have been the entrance and the sort of boundary wall, but all of that, this is how it is today. It's just kind of been reduced to the plinth and some levels of the basement panel plinth, and you can't almost see it. So, but there's no sort of coherent argument as to how this was completely reduced to rubble and nothing, or was it incomplete, was it not built wholly. And of course, things like this which are kind of hidden in the landscape, such as in Hulikeri, when you kind of move away from the Halebidu town a little bit, you find this square tank from Narasimha the First's period, which has elements which borrow from the Hoysaleshwar temple, such as these Kuta shrines in the Vesara style. Moving on to Belur, we see that though this was established earlier, it was not established as a city. It was established as a sort of finite bounded temple complex with an entrance gopura and a sort of boundary wall. And this is the main temple, just in axis, and beside which sits the temple that the Queen commissioned, which is the Kappe Chennigaraya. So the Chennakeshava temple at Belur stands in a high-walled paved courtyard, about 120 meters by 135 meters, and is entered through this lofty gopura, which is actually a later addition from the Vijayanagar time. There are other subsidiary monuments because this kind of became the royal precinct, so every king wanted to add his temple within this compound itself and not outside. So this is how the compound is today. If you see old photographs, you'll see that the ASIs has cleared out a whole lot of structures which had kind of over a period of time encroached and were added. But now it basically becomes these two, which is the main monument of the Chennakeshava in Belur, the Kappe Chennigaraya. And these are additional temples and facilities and the tank over here, which were all added by sort of subsequent rulers. Within this temple, this one becomes a very interesting case study to understand a sort of assemblage. This shrine, which is known as the Andal temple, is dedicated to a Tamil poetess saint who became popular during the 16th and 17th century when this temple was actually erected. And though in form and its sort of configuration, it has nothing, it doesn't resemble a typical, canonical Hoysala temple. Its sanctuary and its mandap walls have actually been imaginatively assembled with columns and sculpted panels which were bought from dilapidated salvage sites elsewhere. So it is believed that the Kedareshwar and the Nagareshwar temples in Halebidu, which we saw that were damaged by the earthquake or for whatever reasons, those panels, those sculptures were all then later brought to this site, and that's how this temple was assembled. And if you see the roof, it's also not a typical, Vesara or a Bhumija roof, but it's more of a Kalash-shaped, but it's wholly put together using salvage architectural fragments. And then finally, when we come to the Somnathapur temple, we really see that this becomes an outstanding example after all those sort of experimentations that occurred over the interim years of late Hoysala architecture and art, which is this Trikuta style temple, which is situated within a traditional Brahmin Agraharam, and it's also located within a wider sacred geography which extends up to the Kaveri river. To understand these temples better, of course, there is the primary source of information which has been looked at, translated, and understood by several scholars are inscriptions. And they become important because naming religious monuments after the sponsor was a customary in Hoysala times, and mentioning the name of the reigning monarch. And hence, such acknowledgement gained permanence through such inscriptions, which were either engraved at temple gateways or at the walls and doorways of these temples. So this is the one which is at Somnathapura. It's almost 3 meters high, and it has about 91 lines of text in Old Kannada, which gives information about the temple patron, the date of its construction as 1268, the worship provision of 3 deities which are consecrated in the temple, which is Keshav, Janardhan, and Venugopal. It also talks about the lineage and the rise of the Hoysalas and their genealogy. Then there's a second set of inscriptions which talks about all the sort of listing the bequests which have been made to the merchants, the teachers, land grants that were given to priests and officers. And it kind of gives you a sort of holistic picture also of daily temple rituals for these 3 deities. And it's a sort of good archive into the religious practices in the Hoysala times. Adjacent to this is another sort of inscription, but this is more a dedication of loyalty and, to a master. And this one outside the Hoysaleshwar temple is representing the tragic story of Kuvara Lakshman, a bodyguard of Ballal II, who killed himself after his royal master died. So if you kind of look at each of these carefully, you will see that it's the same man, and slowly he has a knife, and the head kind of separates from the torso. And it's a series of, it's almost like that stop motion animation in sculpture, because as the person moves, the head is kind of being slit. So here he's slitting his head, and by the time you go here, the head has kind of detached itself from the body. And this was a sort of way of representing extreme loyalty to the monarch, and also encoded within an object like this. The third aspect which really sets Hoysala monuments apart from in sort of Indian art and iconography were, of course, the sculptors and the artists. And we find that in addition to evidence substantiating the role of Hoysala patrons, plentiful information is available on individual sculptors, masons, and scribes. This is in striking contrast to temples elsewhere in India, where it is believed that the Indian craftsman is kind of the unacknowledged, unsung heroes, and we don't know their names, etc. But in Hoysala temples, we see that there are label inscriptions on most and many of the key carvings, which gives the name, the title, so here at the sort of base plate level in Kannada, which gives the names, titles, and affiliations of the workmen involved, offering valuable insights into where they came from, who they were, and how they worked. This is a bracket element in Belur, which has about 42 such exterior brackets, of which we see more than half have been signed by different carvers, indicating the considerable number of specialists. So it's also the sort of the volume of artists and sculptors that were commissioned for this ambitious project. Many of them compare themselves to Vishwakarma, the legendary architect of the universe. Others describe themselves as destroyers or thunderbolts. So it talks about this sort of rivalry that existed between sculptors, between calligraphers, and there was a sort of competition as to, it was not one artist who was making all the brackets. And yet we see an incredible amount of consistency. Labels also specify the guilds to which the artists belong. So one such guild called itself the members call themselves the servants of Saraswati. Records often stipulate payments and rewards that craftsmen earned in the form of land grants or the right to collect dues. And finally, we see that these sculptors have not only left their mark on the bracket figures, but also on, this is a Keshava Murti, which is currently at the Met Museum in New York, but these are from the Hoysaleshwar temple. So each panel also somewhere we see that the sculptors have left their signature and their mark here. And I'm just going to highlight the names of two such who have a prolific body of work. Of course, one was Dasoja, the most famous one possibly, from Balligram, who is first noticed at Belur, where he carved many of those bracket figures. His name is also found in Halebidu and other sites, so he kind of traveled widely across the kingdom on these assignments. And the second being Mallitamma, another celebrated sculptor who was active for almost 60 years and ended his career at the temple at Somanathapura, the Keshav temple. So with that sort of understanding of the artists, the artisans, the way of the patronage, we kind of understand how this sort of royal project to build prolific temples was undertaken throughout the kingdom. And then we see that the expansion of Hoysalas into northern Karnataka and their campaigns beyond Maharashtra and Malwa and southward into the Tamil country has had its consequences on all of these architects, builders, sculptors. As they moved from zone to zone, they carried these kind of regional styles of where they had worked earlier, whether be it the Chalukyan territories or be it the Chola territories. So they were all kind of now working in the Hoysala territory. And this is best understood in the sort of three types, or the assimilation of three styles that we see in architecture. So such migrations help explain the diversity of features in Hoysala architecture. The Dravid style imported from the Tamil zone, a Karnataka version of the Dravid style inherited from the Chalukyas and perfected by the Hoysalas known as Vesar, and the Bhumija variety of the North Indian Nagar style as learned from the Yadavs and the Paramaras. And it's basically a mix of these three styles that we see, and we can kind of categorize the entire body of Hoysala temples which exist. In determining this architecture, an essential ingredient becomes the construction material, which was locally available gray-green chloritic schist, also locally known as soapstone. And while they inherited this from the Chalukyan style, they perfected it, and this material really helped them because it allowed them to get spans of almost 3.5 meters in height and 4 meters in width, but it also allowed them this sort of finesse because it was a very soft stone when you quarried it, but over time, so it allowed you to get almost this lace-like filigree carving, but over time with weathering, it hardened. So they've had this sort of lasting quality even now. So it was great for both purposes. To carve, it was soft, and then it kind of settled and weathered over time. The place where we see these schist columns really in their full glory is really the mandapas of most Hoysala temples, and they are really the showpiece of the masonry technique that the artist had mastered. The columns with circular shafts exhibit curved profiles which are precisely cut with sharp incisions and ridges, whose method of fashioning out of the schist is much debated. What we are endorsing is that most likely stone blocks were placed vertically on a rotating base and then trimmed with metal wires, after which they were treated with an abrasive to attain a mirror-like polish. Other columns, other than the circular Srikara columns, the other combinations have square shafts with multiple facets, polygonal shafts with cut-out bands of foliation, or stellate shafts with sharply angled points. And in the Belur temple, we see all these types. And as we move on to subsequent temples, we see that they've kind of streamlined and selected a few and mastered them. So our understanding is that the Chennakeshava also became a sort of experimental canvas for them to test and see how much this material could be pushed, how much the material could be explored. And we see the maximum number of variations and categories of column explorations in Belur. While we move to Somanathapura, we see a sort of uniform, standardized sort of maturation of this style. But what is also interesting is the plan form of the temple. It's just not the verticality and the visual sort of grandeur that they have, but the Hoysala temples present a considerable variety of layouts, incorporating single, double, or triple sanctuaries as seen at Belur, Halebidu, and Somnathpur respectively. Each of the twin linga sanctuaries of Halebidu faces a mandap and beyond into twin Nandi pavilions. So we kind of see a similar construct of the sanctuary, the mandap, and in this case, Nandi pavilions for Hoysaleshwar and Santaleshwar. So this becomes a sort of Dvikuta format, whereas in Belur, they kind of start off with an Ekakuta or a single sanctuary, but a much larger mandap. And by the time we reach Somnathpura, they've made it a Trikuta with 3 sanctuaries opening into a much smaller mandap, where the mandap kind of merges with the porch. And these being Keshava temples of Shaiva monuments do not have any additional elements like a Nandi pavilion. A tower soaring above these sanctuaries summits with the lingas, and we come to different varieties of the sanctuaries as well. Adjoining the sanctuary is a small chamber or vestibule where priests recite suitable prayers, conduct sacraments, and convey offerings. Worshippers gathered in a columned hall or mandap for auspicious viewing. Sanctuaries to Shiva accommodate the phallic emblem, while those consecrated to Vishnu represent the god in various avatars. So this is the antaral space from where you kind of have a view into the Belur and the Halebidu temples. As you can see, the Dwarpals kind of are in varying scales. So there's sort of, again, there's a sort of play in what do you give focus to and what do you emphasize. So the lintel here becomes important, the dwarpals become important, and then the rest of the space is kind of, inside it's very bare. So the frame, you're kind of framing the way you see the god. But what they've also mastered in these temples from the plan form is the way the plan kind of extrudes itself into the three-dimensional object, which is a distinctive aspect of Hoysala temples, is the derivation of the stellate plan, which is an element that we see in emerging in Chalukyan architecture, but has been kind of, again, mastered and experimented with in Hoysala. So sanctuaries at Belur, Halebidu, and Somanathapura have their walls, which are kind of divided into multiple facets. So what the stellate does is, once you kind of rotate it with the complex geometry, there are squares which are rotated around a common point to almost give you like 16-sided star-shaped configurations. It enhances and amplifies the vertical surfaces that you therefore have to carve and express yourself more creatively. So the stellate also helped in enhancing the visual quality of the temple. But above that, we see that the shikharas were where the regional variations of the various influences are most visible. So this is at Somnathpur, where the Vesara towers are boldly modeled as diminishing tiers of miniature shrines with curved vaulted roofs, where the superstructures have inward projections. So this is a detail, and you can see it's almost like a tessellated modular geometry where the towers are composed of diminishing series of short walls and shallow pilasters with seated yakshas. And the pilasters carry double sets of eaves and blocks with foliated horseshoe arch motifs, or kudus, which are these. And other motifs represent scrolls, jeweled bands and musicians, dancers and makaras. And the crowning roof exhibits curved fluted profiles. Corollary to that, it's really interesting how the Belur Chennakeshava does not have a tower rising above its sanctuary, and this is true for both the sort of important dynastic monuments as to where did the roof, the sanctuary disappear. And an archival photograph here from the 1880s shows that there used to be a tower at one point in time, but it's no more. So its existence is obviously confirmed because it's also mentioned in the 1298 reports and the Mysore Archaeological Department reports of 1880. But from where we learn is that the tower was made in brick with timber supports. So it's kind of baffling as to why an entire a temple which is made in stone and such an important monument would not really pay equal amount of attention to the tower. And what George and I also feel is, if you kind of look at the proportion, it's too massive, it's too huge compared to the sort of delicate flat proportion that the walls of the temple and the superstructure has. So it also kind of creates a sort of visual as well as maybe structural imbalance, and because it was made in brick and timber, it kept collapsing, and they could never put it back together because of the sort of structural imbalance that took place. It's the same sort of logic when we look at the temples in Halebidu, because it's not possible that they didn't have the superstructure because they were dynastic monuments and royal shrines. But again, if they were built in brick and timber, then they probably collapsed, and once the temple was raided and not actively in worship anymore, they did not care to build it back. Other elements which now really we're kind of going into the details and the delicacy of the work, of the architecture, are these base panels this is from the Hoysaleshwar, which is almost more than 2 meters high, composed of 8 horizontal friezes. The bottom 5 portray high relief elephants with riders proceeding towards the corners, yalis with savage head and curling tails, scrolling leafy figures in in between bands that kind of separate the horses from the yalis and the yalis from the elephants. And then on the upper two panels, which is here, and we begin, which is also the eye level. So if you're standing in front of these temples, this is where your human eye level is, where we find narrative panels from the Bhagavad Purana, the Mahabharata, and the Ramayana. And the topmost two courses show Makaras, Kirtimukhas, and Hamsas. And it kind of gives you a sort of unified canvas. Another element are these, the sub-shrines, which kind of attach on all three faces of the Garbhagriha and from the outside, and also at the entrance steps, which are double-story shrines or with stepped plans that project outwards. They kind of continue at the base with the sort of bas relief with the elephants and the yalis and the horses. But as we move above, we see this sort of Vesara crown, which merges with, so all the sort of sight lines match, and though it's an attachment, it kind of becomes a unified three-dimensional extruded surface, which is enhanced due to the stellate and the projections that you get. The open porches or the mandapas are other sort of highlight elements of these temples, with the sort of continuous, this kind of sloping backrest that you see, which gives you a sense that this entire mandap would have been open when they were originally constructed, and then later they were the screens were all kind of later added. And at Belur, this is very, very evident, because you can see, and this is something which again baffles us, that why would they not focus on detailing in the way the screen comes and meets the column. And you see a very, very finely carved narrative panels, geometric panels of these screens, which were all added in the period of Ballal II. So in Vishnuvardhan's time, it was an open mandap. But the way these screens were fitted raises again certain questions of how and why they were done, and why the detailing was not thought of in a much more rigorous way to do justice to the monument. So this is an older photo of the same temple, and you can see how the parapet above was a lot more ornate and, than what we see today, because it has a central Garuda and other sort of figures on the side. But today, all of that has gone, and these are also questions of how we keep our monuments, and what aspects of their history and element we remove, and what we kind of keep. But if we look at this, which is the temple at Talakkad, the Kirti Narayan, which was contemporaneous to the Belur temple, this one has maintained its sort of open mandap format. This has not put screens. The recent metal screens would be something ASI has put, but it gives you the sense of a sort of a place for congregation where light would kind of flood it. Of course, the ceilings of Hoysala temples are other sort of canvases, so you can see that there was pretty much no surface, horizontal or vertical, which missed the eyes of the carvers. These ceilings were inside the mandapas. This is at Somanathapura, where we see the maximum sort of experimentation. Each bay has a sort of different compartment, and from corbelled rings to create dome-like interiors, often with pendant central lotuses around a cutout. They were trying to, as you can see, ape timber, rib-like rafters, but in stone, and even interweaving techniques such as looped bands. So the ceilings at Somanathapura are unsurpassed in their variety and virtuoso techniques. Ceilings and ribs have octagonal, multi-lobed, or 12-spoked frames, all with central pendant lotuses. In comparison, this is the 3.5 meters diameter dome-like ceiling at Belur, which is one single unified ceiling above the mandap. And it shows it has three centric corbelled rings of tiny Vaishnav figures encircling a block. This is a 1 meter suspended block showing Narasimha killing Hiranyakashipu. And finally, the last element of the architectural formations would be in the Shaiva monuments, the Nandi pavilions, which are freestanding and they are aligned in axis with the mandap. And of course, there are two pavilions, one for the queen and one for the king, and they're accessed from side steps, and they also have balcony seating around, and follow, they're less ornate, but they have the similar sort of architectural elements. But what is also interesting here in the King's Nandi Pavilion, that we see a Surya temple, which has been desecrated. However, we see the sun god with the chariots and a carved sort of pedestal. So it's also interesting, and we've not been able to decode, what happened to that pavilion, because this temple was not ransacked the inside, but the Surya temple has been. It's been desecrated. So that is again another mystery which we're trying to figure out. And finally, I'm going to touch about some of the sculptural themes when we kind of, and this is what Hoysala temples are largely known for, the sort of profusion of its art, iconography, narratives, storytelling that one sees. But we've also tried to focus a lot more on, in this guidebook, on the architectural aspects, and then kind of look at what some of these cultural themes are. So Hoysala temples are unsurpassed for their wealth and images and dense ornamentation. The preoccupation with carved detail reflects the consummate skills of local artists, as well as possibilities of the schist medium in allowing this precision. Figures of divinities, consorts, celestials and humans are overwhelmed with encrusted costumes, jewels, and hairstyles. The weapons, emblems, and other attributes that they hold are similarly embellished. Hoysala artists were also very concerned to fashion naturalistic male and female figures with sensitive facial expressions, fully rounded bodies, animated hand gestures, and gracefully or dynamically disposed limbs. This sculptural realism is nowhere better expressed than the depiction of the Sala legend. The heroic founder of the Hoysalas is shown clutching a dagger to stab a savage beast, who has ferocious horns, eyes, mane, and a curling tail. Of course, considered among the greatest masterpieces of Hoysala art are these bracket figures, or the Madanikas, who angle outwards from the top of columns in temple porches and mandap interiors fashioned in almost three-dimensional maidens standing below trees and canopy and foliage. These figures embody the ideal of female beauty as expressed in a broad range of seductive images. At Belur, where the greatest number of such brackets is found, maidens appear as dancers playing musical instruments, huntresses bearing bows and arrows, or simply as young women admiring themselves in a mirror, plaiting their tresses, gazing at a parrot, or warding off a monkey. So, very, very imaginative possibilities. The next element, and it's almost lace-like, are these doorway pediments, or lintels as we understand. These ornamented pediments over the entrances at Belur and Halebidu show deities set in copious foliation, issuing from open-mouthed makaras with scrolling tails at either side. Garuda is an important auspicious figure who finds a sort of central position here, flanked by the two bellowing makaras. And Narasimha savagely killing Hiranyakashipu is another sort of favorite theme that is found on the other faces as well. Stone screens, which were later additions, assumed to be incorporated as relief panels by Ballal II. And this one, though many history books say that the king depicted in this temple is actually Vishnuvardhan, but we kind of differ from that position, and we think that this is Ballal and his depiction of his court, because it is he who put in his period, these screens, and it is most obvious that he would honor himself and not his ancestor. So we believe that these are, this is the court of Ballal II, seated in the company of his principal queen and his retinue, together with officers, Brahmin advisors, and their disciples. Such compositions offer unique visual testimonies and formal audiences at the Hoysala court, while figures like Garuda and Narasimha are depicted above in the upper panels. Compared to these, which are at the Ballal panel was at the entry of the Belur temple, we see a host of other sanctuary panels covered with sculpted divinities. At Belur, these include a comprehensive range of Vishnu avatars and emanations, expressing the Sri Vaishnava emphasis. The same is true at Somanathapura, though we also see Ganesh and Durga over there. A greater mix of Shaiva and Vaishnava divinities are seen at temples in Halebidu. Gods stand in formal postures or are seated calmly with their consorts, or also appear in violent moods, such as what we see on the left, Shiva dancing triumphantly in the skin of the elephant demon he has just slaughtered. The other on the right is another dynamic portrait which shows Krishna holding up Govardhan to shelter the herds. And we also have these famous panels of Narasimha and Varaha. So we somehow see that Narasimha is the avatar which finds a presence in almost all of the temple in very prominent areas like the lintel at the entrance. Another celebrated sculpture is this one of Ravan shaking multiple heads and arms. He's shaking Kailash, the trees and the forests on the mountain populated with minute figures, arms, and birds. While just next to that, you see a sort of calm Shiva and Parvati sitting unperturbed, also there at the summit. So, but why I've put these photos here together is that if you look at the temples in Belur and in Halebidu especially, you begin to see this sort of profusion of and three-dimensionality. This is a corner piece, but you can't kind of make out the edges anymore. You have an extremely three-dimensional piece where the arms and the limbs and the secondary figures all kind of enmesh into a very, very unified sort of imagination. So the artists are not looking at faces of stone, but they're kind of looking at it as a three-dimensional composition. And we see the stellate helping that because it gives you all these facets, and each projection kind of gets a minor and a major deity. And that is especially seen here, where some of them you can't even imagine how they would have carved it. But when we come to the later temples, in the other sites, and especially in Somanathapura, we see that the artists have become much more restrained. Their canvas is now sort of finite. They are carving within a sort of specific proportion, and the three-dimensionality which was at play in these monuments has now become a lot more mellowed and subdued, and it's almost like each panel is separate and has been kind of assembled. And finally, the interior spaces, which is in complete contrast to the sculptural exuberance of the exteriors. So the Hoysala temple interiors are actually fairly austere. The ornamentation is restricted to the columns, to the brackets, and the shrines, while the wall surfaces largely tend to remain bare, except these two famous depictions, and no kind of presentation in the Hoysalas can touch upon enough about the Mohini depiction, which is this serene depiction of a sinuous body which is elaborately dressed and jeweled, which stands, and opposite this kind of stands this so-called Narasimha pillar with a 12-sided shaft with miniature avatars of Vishnu. Do I have some more time? I'll just take both of these are in the Belur temple. So if this is the Narasimha pillar, the Mohini is actually somewhere there at the end. So it's closer to the Antaral wall. Okay. So now, finally, I will touch upon just one final aspect, which is actually what these temples are today. And I'm just adding this lens now as a sort of conservation architect, looking at these temples and these monuments as a sort of living archive over time. And those of you who are aware, these two temples, especially Belur and Halebidu, are on the UNESCO tentative list as World Heritage Sites under the title of the ensemble of the Hoysalas. But when we kind of look at, interestingly, to understand their historicity, these old views, and I'm going to be kind of putting some before-after images from these views by Linear Stripe from 1885, which were negatives commissioned he was commissioned to develop these. And we kind of see how these monuments have kind of changed and also kind of cleaned up over time. But in the process, the question that I'd like to throw out is that what are we kind of retaining, how much historicity and how much are we altering in the name of, this sort of continuity, and how much is enough? And, it's kind of interesting politics of conservation when we look at the legacy of these temples now. So this is, of course, the Gopuram of the Belur temple, which was actually built by the Vijayanagars. It is not from the Hoysala period. And today when we see, this is what it looks like. So a sort of formal, you can see the tank was there. These sort of colonnades have all been standardized and this element has been removed. But you can also see there was something here. You can see these sort of brackets angling out. There was a structure here. There was a sort of structure here, which is all gone today. So, and so there's this sort of conversation we can have about what was original, what did sort of Vishnuvardhan build, was that more authentic, or all the subsequent layers of time and what they added, because the sense we get is this was an equally beautiful structure, whatever it was. But it's not there anymore in the name of, encroachment, maybe. So what is that structure? So now, again, this is another view which shows that what we see today as these are the entrance steps to the Belur temple, the Chennakeshava, but it was actually not visible at all because it had this other temple in front of it. Maybe it was a mandapa of some sort, a four mandapa before you entered the space. But now that is gone again. So this stands as an object. You don't get a sense of the series and the sort of sequential way in which you approach it. And this is seen, actually this is this. So and this is a photograph when the sanctuary roof was still there. So there was another sort of entrance pavilion, mandapa, through which you entered and approached the main temple. So today, all of that has been removed. This is the same Deepastamba which has remained. The temple which was hidden. So what they've done is by removing all of this as encroachment, they've given you a full view of the temple, but we don't know if that was the original intent or whether were you meant to go through a sort of, and then the temple reveals itself instead of, being on display right in the beginning. And of course, the Shikhara is nowhere to be seen. But what is also interesting is the same set of photos show that this doorway to the Hoysaleshwar temple was actually boarded up. So it was probably abandoned, not in worship, and then somebody decided to block it up, and then were the interiors not accessible at all. So in that case, this has again been opened up, cleaned up, and is in active worship. So these old photographs are really help in understanding aspects of the conservation and politics, and this is really interesting because the focus is, this is the buttress element that links the two pavilions of the Hoysaleshwar, but I would like to bring your focus not to this element, this is more or less remained, but look here at the jalis. These are the original jalis. And now look here. Suddenly we see in the name of conservation some Mughal jalis have appeared? Is it so difficult to create the original? So these are also now things of, but we say that as conservationists, but the temple is there, it's active in worship, but it's these small little nuances and these modifications that really tell us how we understand our history and how we kind of take it forward in continuity. Thank you.
Really interesting talk today on Belur and Halebidu, and we'll leave it open for questions. Anybody wanting to ask questions?
Sure.
Yeah? No questions? Sure, you were so perfect, giving all the descriptions.
Yes, please.
Chola period, you do not see a Venugopal bronze, whereas Venugopal is very much a part of this architecture.
Yes.
Any special reason why Venugopal, as we proceed into the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, disappears from Chola art?
In Hoysala art,
It's there,
yes.
but then as we move forward,
I'm really not in a position to answer that. Maybe Sherry, when you're able to answer that. No, but I'm not sure.
Like to come here and talk.
Sorry?
Okay, there's one more gentleman. Well, thank you very much on behalf of the Chhatrapati Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya and Museum Society. We'd like to thank you very much. We've just been for a trip to
Yes.
Shravanbellagola, and that was one of these two temples were the first two temples we saw. And we were all just fascinated. So I see a lot of members who visited with me, and they're here. And thank you very, very much.
Thank you.